The village dozed beneath the weight of the afternoon sun. The sky hung cloudless and pale, its light pouring down in heavy sheets of gold that bleached the clay walls and baked the earth until it cracked. A shimmering haze hovered above the rooftops, making the distant hills ripple like water. The streets were nearly empty. Most of the villagers had retreated indoors, hiding from the heat behind thick mud brick walls that held the coolness of morning. The marketplace, so lively at dawn, now lay silent, its stalls deserted save for a few stubborn flies, buzzing lazily over forgotten baskets. Children sprawled in the narrow shadows cast by the walls, their play subdued by the sweltering air. A boy leaned against a wooden post, fanning himself with a palm leaf, while two girls sat on a stone step, drawing idle patterns in the dust with sticks. Even the dogs, usually quick to bark at strangers, lay stretched in the shade, their tongues lolling as they panted. A soft trickle of sound came from the well in the square, the only sign of movement, as a young woman drew up water with slow, deliberate pulls, the rope creaking as if reluctant to work in the heat. Beyond her, the fields shimmered faintly, the stalks of millet and maize bending under the weight of the sun. Everything seemed still, trapped in the sluggish rhythm of the hottest hour. The air itself felt too heavy for laughter, too thick for arguments. It was the kind of afternoon when nothing stirred except the cicadas, buzzing from the thorn bushes, and the occasional flutter of a pigeon's wings. No one suspected that, beneath this cloak of stillness, the earth was restless. No one guessed that a quiet warning was already being prepared, not by a man or a machine, but by a small creature in the dust. In the silence of the village, the stage was set, and soon, the first sign of trouble would scratch its way into view. The silence of the afternoon was broken not by voices or footsteps, but by a faint rustling at the edge of one of the oldest walls in the village. The wall stood tall and sun-bleached, its surface rough with age, its foundation half swallowed by drifting dust. It had guarded the lane for generations, so familiar that few even noticed it anymore. But that day, something stirred at its base. A small lizard, its scales glinting emerald and bronze in the sunlight, scuttled into view. Normally, such creatures darted quickly across the ground, vanishing into cracks and shadows. But this one did not flee. Instead, it froze, body pressed low to the earth, tongue flicking rapidly, as if tasting something unseen. Its head turned sharply toward the wall, and in the next moment, it began to dig. At first, the movements were quick but measured, scratching with tiny claws, kicking dust behind it in neat sprays. But soon the rhythm grew frantic. The lizard clawed with desperate speed, its body twisting, tail lashing as grains of earth scattered in a widening arc. The sound of its frantic burrowing echoed oddly against the wall, a dry rasping that drew curious glances from a pair of children nearby. "Look at it," one boy murmured, shading his eyes with his hand. "What's it doing?" The other shrugged, but both watched as the lizard returned again and again to the same patch, scraping so furiously that the dust rose in thin clouds around it. Its sides heaved with effort, yet it did not pause. It clawed as though the wall itself demanded it, as though something within the earth was pressing it to act. The children laughed softly at first. "Maybe it's crazy from the heat," one suggested, tossing a pebble nearby. But the lizard didn't run. It only dug harder, its claws clicking against a surface just beneath the soil. Something firmer than dust. Something that made the sound of scratching turn sharp and urgent. Now the boys grew uneasy. They exchanged a glance, their laughter fading. The lizard was no longer just a curiosity. It was working with a purpose, frantic and relentless, as if the ground itself carried a secret it was determined to uncover. The two boys lingered, dust clinging to their bare feet as they watched the lizard's desperate work. Its claws raked the earth without pause, scattering dry soil into little piles. The longer they stared, the stranger it seemed. This was no casual scratching, no idle hunt for insects. It was urgent, almost violent, as if the small creature were racing against time. One boy cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down the lane, "Come and see! The lizard's gone mad." His cry carried through the sleepy stillness of the afternoon. A woman fetching water at the well paused, squinting toward the commotion. A pair of old men playing dice in the shade of a doorway looked up. Soon, a handful of villagers ambled over, curious for anything that might break the monotony of the heat. They gathered near the wall, forming a loose semicircle, their sandals crunching on the brittle earth. The children pressed closer, pointing excitedly as the lizard flung itself at the ground again and again, its tiny body trembling with the effort. A man chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. The sun's cooked its brain. Poor thing thinks it can dig to water. Another laughed, shaking his head. Or maybe it's building a palace for the ants. The jokes rippled lightly through the crowd, but they did not hide the unease growing in their eyes. The longer the villagers watched, the harder it became to dismiss the creature's frenzy. This was not random. The lizard scratched the same spot without pause, its claws now scraping against something beneath the surface. Each sharp tick-tick-tick echoed faintly off the wall. Dust rose in thin clouds, coating the animal's scales in pale grit. Yet it pressed on, mouth opening and closing in silent gasps, its body quivering with determination. The sight of such relentless energy in a creature so small began to unsettle the villagers. Children leaned forward, whispering, "Why won't it stop? What's under there?" The lizard's tail lashed violently as it clawed deeper, and the ground around the wall began to look disturbed, loosened in a way that made some of the adults frown. Their smiles faded. "It knows something," murmured the elder of the dice players, his voice suddenly sober. "Animals don't waste their strength for nothing." The crowd grew quiet. For the first time, the villagers no longer saw a frantic lizard. They saw a warning they did not yet understand. The lizard's claws struck again and again, each scrape against the earth sending a faint vibration through the wall above. The crowd, now larger, leaned closer. Their earlier amusement dissolved into a strange anticipation. Even the air seemed heavier, as if holding its breath. Then a boy, crouching low with his chin nearly in the dust, whispered, "Look, right there." All eyes followed his finger. At the base of the wall, where the lizard's frenzy had cleared away the soil, a hairline fracture ran jagged and thin across the sun-baked clay. It was so faint that in any other moment it might have gone unnoticed. But once seen, it seemed to spread wider with every heartbeat. One girl reached out with a stick and tapped the spot. A dry flake of plaster crumbled away, revealing more of the crack beneath. The lizard, as if vindicated, scratched harder, its tiny body vibrating with renewed urgency. A murmur rippled through the villagers. "It's just old," someone said uncertainly. "The wall's been here longer than most of us." But another voice countered, low and uneasy, "Walls age in silence. They don't draw lizards to claw them open." The elder shuffled forward, his sandals dragging through the dust. He bent with effort, placing a calloused hand against the wall. For a long moment he stood still, his palm pressed flat, his eyes narrowing. When he finally spoke, his words were grave. "There's movement inside." The villagers stiffened. Children edged back, clutching their mothers' skirts. A faint, hollow groan shuddered through the wall, as if something deep within had shifted. Tiny particles of soil trickled down, speckling the ground like falling sand. The jokes were gone now. Faces hardened with concern, lips pressed tight as the reality sank in. The wall was not merely cracked, it was weakening, alive with strain, like a wound ready to split. And it was the lizard that had revealed it, sounding an alarm in dust and scratches that no human eye had caught. Above them, the hot sun pressed down, the air shimmering with heat. But beneath that familiar stillness, something hidden stirred, and everyone could feel it now. The earth was restless, and the wall was only the surface of the secret it concealed. The murmur of unease spread quickly through the gathered crowd. More villagers arrived, wiping sweat from their brows as they squinted at the wall, now visibly marked with a growing crack. The lizard had retreated a step, sides heaving from its furious work, but its bright eyes remained fixed on the damaged spot, as though its task was not yet complete. The elder motioned for silence. He knelt again, brushing away the loosened soil with trembling fingers. The ground was soft, looser than it should have been, and when he pressed against it, it seemed to sink slightly under his touch. He withdrew his hand sharply, his face darkening. "This isn't just a wall giving way," he said. His voice was steady, but every word carried weight. "There's hollow earth behind it." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the villagers. Hollow ground in a village built on hard clay was no small matter. Several men pushed forward, prodding the base with sticks, testing. One stick slipped deep into the soil with alarming ease, far too deep for ordinary ground. The elder nodded grimly. "It's the old water tunnel." A hush fell. Everyone knew of it. A forgotten artery built generations ago to carry runoff and spring water beneath the settlement. Most believed it had collapsed long ago, buried and sealed. Yet here it was, alive again, straining under the weight of earth. As if to confirm his words, a dull crunch echoed from beneath their feet. The wall shivered. Small rivulets of soil trickled down, making the crack in its surface lengthen visibly. "If it gives way," one of the men said, his voice tight, "the ground will sink. The wall will fall. And worse, the water could rush in." He pointed toward the nearby houses, their clay walls rising just a few steps away. "It will take them with it." The reality sank in like a stone dropped into a still pond. What had begun as a curiosity, a lizard clawing at dust, was now a threat that could bring ruin. The women clutched their children close, the men exchanged tense glances, and the air filled with the low thrum of voices, fear carried in every tone. And through it all, the lizard remained by the wall, watching, its tail twitching sharply in the dust. To the villagers, it was no longer frantic or foolish. It was the messenger, the first to sense what the earth had tried to hide. The danger was no longer hidden. It loomed in front of them, waiting for the smallest push to break free. The warning was clear now. The wall was failing, and beneath it the old water tunnel yawned like a wound in the earth. The villagers did not wait for more signs. Urgency spread through them like fire in dry grass. Men dashed to their sheds, returning with shovels, wooden beams, and coils of rope. Women hurried with baskets of stone and clay, their skirts darkened with dust. Children, wide-eyed and eager to help, filled buckets with water from the well, lugging them with both hands, sloshing precious drops onto the ground as they ran. "Brace the wall first," the elder commanded. His voice, cracked with age, cut through the rising clamor with authority. "If it falls, the tunnel will swallow the street." The blacksmith and his sons heaved thick beams into place, jamming them against the wall's base at steep angles. Others shoveled earth against the supports, packing it down with their heels. Every groan of the clay bricks above made them flinch, yet their hands never stopped. A group of women mixed clay and straw into heavy mortar, pounding it with their fists until it stuck in clumps. With bare hands they slapped it against the crack, smearing and pressing, layer upon layer, until the jagged wound was sealed in a crude but solid patch. The ground trembled once, a low shudder that made several gasp. Dust spilled from the crack, but the braces held. "Faster!" someone shouted, sweat streaking their face. Children darted between the adults like runners in a relay, delivering buckets of water to soften the clay, then rushing back for more. Their laughter had vanished. Now their voices carried the strain of fear and determination. Even the smallest, too weak to carry much, gathered stones in their arms, dropping them in piles for the builders. The work went on for hours. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the lane. But still they labored, strengthening, patching, shoring up the earth. The air was thick with dust and sweat, with the rhythmic sounds of shovels striking soil and hands pounding clay. At last, as the light began to soften into the glow of evening, the wall stood firm again. Braces locked it upright, new mortar sealed its surface, and the dangerous hollow beneath had been reinforced with stone and earth. The groans of collapse were gone, replaced by the solid silence of stability. The villagers stepped back, breathing hard, their faces streaked with mud, their clothes heavy with grime. And there, just a few steps away, the lizard perched on a stone, its chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. It blinked once, flicked its tail, and scurried off into the safety of the dusk. The people followed it with their eyes. None laughed now. None called it mad. They understood. Without that frantic burrowing, they might have discovered the danger only when it was too late. When the last beams were set and the final layers of clay pressed firm, the villagers finally allowed themselves to rest. The wall stood secure, its cracks sealed, its base strengthened. The old water tunnel, once ready to collapse, now lay bound and braced beneath tons of earth. The danger had passed, but the memory of how it was revealed lingered in every heart. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with amber light, families gathered in the square. Children, still dusty and tired, clung to their parents, whispering about the lizard that had scratched so wildly at the wall. Some imitated its frantic movements. Others repeated the moment when the crack first appeared. Their voices carried awe, not ridicule. The elder rose slowly from where he sat, leaning on his cane. His voice, though weary, carried clearly through the crowd. Today, it was not our eyes that saw the danger. It was not our hands that found it. It was a creature no bigger than my hand. Yet it shouted louder than any of us could. We live because we listened. Heads nodded all around. Women glanced at the patched wall, their faces solemn. Men folded their arms, humbled by the thought that their strength alone would not have been enough without the warning. One boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "The lizard saved our homes." She smiled faintly, smoothing his hair. "Yes, and we must remember it." That evening, the story spread from door to door, told by firelight as meals were shared. How the lizard dug with all its might, how the villagers first laughed, then feared, then acted. How something so small had uncovered a danger so great. And from that day forward, the saying took root in the village. Watch the earth, listen to the creatures, for even a lizard may save your home. The lizard itself vanished back into the fields and stones, unseen, unpraised. But the wall it had revealed stood tall, stronger than before. A silent reminder of the afternoon when a frantic scratching saved an entire street. And though life soon returned to its quiet rhythm, the people never forgot that nature speaks, and that wisdom can come from the smallest of voices, if only one dares to hear it.